Of the show now that's called the Roundup Wrap, and this is where we invite our resident analyst, Mightijamie, to talk to us about some of the stories highlighted earlier, as well as throw forward into the new week ahead. Good morning, Jamie. How are you on this Monday?
Morning to you, morning to the listeners. I'm good. I hope you are too.
Yes, I am. It's my month. It's Women's Month. We're in August now.
Yes, happy Women's Month.
Thank you. But today, let's start talking about African leaders who have agreed to unify all peace efforts into a single Africa-led initiative to address conflict in the Eastern DRC. This was at a joint EAC SADC summit co-chaired by Presidents William Ruto of Kenya and Emmerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe. What was resolved there?
Well, what they've resolved is that they're going to do one peace initiative, and how that's going to work is that all of the other peace initiatives which were happening, there was one which was being run by the Eastern African Bloc, there was one that was being run by SADC, and Angola one, and the Luanda one, etc. So now what we need to do is to put them all together and do one. That's what they're saying. They're saying that there's now one African-led process that will bring everything together and focus on the humanitarian situation, the security situation, and the issues that obviously affect the M23 rebels and their supporters and the government of the DRC proper. The irony in all of this, though, is that America has already signed a peace deal, and we've been told multiple times that a deal has been signed between Rwanda and the DRC. We've been told that as a result of that, these issues have now been resolved. However, if we're still seeing African leaders meeting, saying that they want to deal with these things anew or continue to deal with these things, it does indicate, in fact, that the overtures around the peace deal being stable or being signed were a little bit exaggerated, because the troops haven't been integrated, which is one of the terms of conditions or terms of reference, is that the troops, the rebel groups, that M23 movement, needs to merge with the DRC army. That still has not happened. We haven't seen handing over of territories. So it suggests that this is still an ongoing issue. As to whether Emmerson Mnangagwa and Ruto have the gravitas to pull this off, Ruto himself is facing a challenge internally in Kenya, and Emmerson Mnangagwa is not necessarily viewed on the continent as, a negotiator. So I don't know if they can be the two individuals who can bring this together for such long-standing, differences. And knowing that the Americans and others are involved now, I'm not sure that we'll get full resolution, but it looks like they're still trying.
Right. Let's go to Angola. We were speaking about protests there over fuel price hikes last week. So the president has now come out to speak. Angolan President João Lourenço speaking for the first time since the deadly protests erupted over fuel price hikes. He's blaming the unrest on irresponsible citizens and saying that they're influenced by unpatriotic organizations. Previously, his government had said there are criminal intents behind the protests. Are these explanations credible?
No, they're incredible, actually, and incredulous. It's amazing that, African leaders will always look for a third force. They'll always look for someone to blame. This is exactly the same type of rhetoric which was coming out of the Kenyan government officials as well a few weeks ago. The reality is you can't raise the cost of diesel by 33% and then ask everyone to absorb that type of being pushed back without there being economic consequences. Because what has happened, even in the short space of time, is that the cost of food has gone up, as well as the cost of transport. It's gone up significantly. Some people have stopped using other forms of transportation, and that's what led to, last week we saw a taxi driver strike happening there, where there was a 3-day strike called. And we've seen that the protests are being well attended, and the people are frustrated, not only with the issue of the fuel increase, but also with the issue of the underperforming economy, as well as the high levels of corruption that they see. So I think that the Angolan president is like a typical African leader, in that as soon as there's an issue, they want to get the police, they want to crack skulls, they want to restore law and order, quote unquote, while they maintain the disorder of their corruption and mismanagement. But I don't think there's any grounds to what the Angolan president is saying. I think everybody who is doing this is probably genuinely affected by these issues. And of course, you have NGOs, you have the media, but they have a responsibility to report on these issues and to raise these issues. It doesn't make them irresponsible or unpatriotic, Sanda.
And 30 people have died as security forces clashed with protesters. What is the president saying about those tragic deaths?
He's defending the police because they're going with this rhetoric that, it's irresponsible citizens, it's unpatriotic people. And he's then, making the same types of arguments that will be made that, excuse me, these people were armed or these people were, a threat to the police. And these types of rhetoric, I think we should not give much weight to. We're seeing an overhanded response from a government which is trying to force through particular fuel increases, and it has done anyway, and the people are protesting. It's similar to what happened in Kenya when they tried to raise the tax and to affect a lot of things that were going to be everyday utilities, and people say, no, we're not going to be able to do that. Once the price of oil goes up, once the price of cooking oil goes up, the people are not necessarily going. Even if the price of cooking oil went up in South Africa by 33% tomorrow, there would be issues. People would protest because the mothers would be on the streets. It's Women's Month, like we're saying, and women have been critical in South Africa in leading protests of this nature. So I think it's a heavy-handed response. It's typical of what we're seeing, and there are long-term questions that Angola will have to ask because their economy is so oil reliant, and right now I think almost 100% of their exports is still oil. They don't have sufficient refineries to make oil cheaply for all of their people, and that in and of itself is what is contributing to this problem. But it's an oil-rich country which needs to think what happens when people are now using electric cars exclusively, and how do we then support our long-term plans there either. This is the stuff that the Angolan president should be actually dealing with, not blaming the people.
Let's go to Mali now. A court there has detained and charged former Prime Minister Moussa Mara over a social media post where he was criticizing military rule and the crackdown on political freedoms. What exactly did Mara say in that post opposing the government?
Well, I'm not familiar with what he actually said outside of, the headline that you've just read, because, sometimes when we get into a Francophone Africa, some of us are limited in terms of catching up with everything that has been discussed. So I will speak about just the response from the government in and of itself, is that this is a typical problem with autocratic, is that they try to constrain people's free speech rights and people's ability to actually speak the truth to power. So if there was this social media post which was criticizing military rule and crackdown on political freedoms, they've actually just justified the argument by then detaining and charging him, because it should not be a crime to actually speak on these issues. But as we know that Mali is going into a dictatorial direction, and as a result, I don't think we will see much space right now for, opposition parties to operate freely, or for, academics, intellectuals, and former leaders to have a big voice, because really this is a democratic recession. This is what people are talking about when they talk about democratic, regression in Africa. It's countries which seem to be going a democratic direction, these juntas come in, do a coup, and then we find ourselves in a position now where we're right back where we started, with African dictators popping up all over the place.
The move to bar him or stop him from attending a regional conference in Senegal, what do you make of that, and how would that connect to his criticism of the Malian government?
Yeah, well, they don't want him out of the country, is what I got from that, is that because once he's out, then he can get a refugee status and then he can speak more freely. And there's a larger international audience which is willing to hear his story and the story of other people who right now are they're much better to keep him in the country, prevent him from organizing from outside of the country. Because at times like this, the diaspora community can sometimes be the official opposition or the the mobilization for what becomes an eventual opposition and also fund opposition movement. So because he was vocal, because already he's occupied a position of prime minister, they figured that better to keep him in the country where they can keep an eye on him. I think that's their motivation. I don't think that they want him anywhere close to Senegal, and they will continue trying to block him. I don't think that they'll succeed permanently, but maybe this will slow him down in their estimation.
All right, US President Donald Trump has reaffirmed his support for Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara, backing its autonomy in terms of the plans for the sole solution. So the dispute between Morocco and Algeria-backed Polisario Front has been seeking is about being seeking independence. So what do you make in terms of what the implications of the US support for Morocco on Western Sahara's independence efforts and regional stability?
Well, I think that for the Polisario Front and for the supporters of Western Sahara, I think that this is a major blow in terms of the long-term aspiration for it to become an independent state. And, for America to now also be weighing in on the side of Morocco at a time where France has also done the same, and at a time where even one of the big opposition parties in South Africa, namely the MK party, has shifted the position or challenged the position that South Africa has taken, which has been to support the Western Saharan community and their aspirations. So at this particular time, it looks as if their movement is not necessarily enjoying high levels of support, and may then, as a result, lose momentum, because even within the West African group of nations, we've spoken in other episodes where we've seen various shifts where people have been saying, actually, we do support Morocco's plan, we do support Morocco's position on this. So the African Union, which was speaking in one voice on this, now seems to be going in a direction where it becomes more contentious and maybe less clear what the ultimate direction is going to be. And when you have a situation like that, I think that it's indicative of a regression or a loss of, momentum for the Western Saharan movement right now. So I think it's going to be a blow, because we're still early in the Trump administration, and that therefore means that for 3 years or so, they're not going to be able to get much traction on this issue, from what I can see.
Finally, the leader of the UK Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, recently said that she no longer identifies as a Nigerian, and this has sparked debate about identity among diaspora communities. Firstly, is it her necessarily rejecting her Nigerian identity, or just her finding her voice and finding a different identity for herself?
You know what? If it was another person we were speaking about, this would be an easier conversation. But Kemi Badenoch generally is an Afrophobic, xenophobic individual. In as much as she is Nigerian, I don't think that she has ever really been acting as a person who is a custodian of Nigerian traditions, values, customs. Even the fact that we use her abbreviated name and not her full name is an indicator already that she's not necessarily, carrying the Nigerian colors proudly. So this was not really a surprise to me that she said something like this, but I would question whether she was authentically ever somebody who was proudly identifying as Nigerian, because she's distanced herself multiple times from the continent of Africa, from African concerns, from African issues. So I think this was more a play by her trying to ingratiate herself to the Tories and to try to maintain support, because she's on her way out as leader of the Conservative Party. They don't want her. So I think she's trying to wash every little bit of Africa off her. And what they are telling her in the party is that she needs to go back to Africa, because the right-wing, racist, xenophobic, Afrophobic part of the Tory party does not actually accept her definition that she's no longer Nigerian. And that's the irony in dealing with this particular person. It complicates the debate, Asanda. But yeah, what a bewildering move from her.
Interesting times, and I guess those within the diaspora as well might have questions for themselves. I just wonder, though, if we don't attach too much of identity in terms of where we come from instead of who we choose to personally be and stand for.
True, true. It's a valid question, and I know the
Yeah.
news is coming up, but I
Yes.
think we'll save it for another date. But it's a valid question, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Mighty. We always appreciate it. And you do have a great start to the week and the rest of the
You too.
week.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Our resident analyst, Mightijamie, giving us a roundup wrap of stories that have made headlines that you may have missed from last week, throwing into this new week. 9:31 Central African time. 6:31 Central African time it is. Let's get our news headlines. Here's Jwalani Tulo Mwepe.